What if democracy isn't just drifting, it's being steered off course? Today on Insibook, we're cracking open Katherine Stewart's Money, Lies, and God, a behind-the-scenes tour of how power, propaganda, and culture war faith get mobilized to tilt the rules of the game. In the next few minutes, we'll follow the money, who funds what and why, decode the lies, how outrage is engineered and spread, and map the networks, the think tanks, influencers, and organizers shaping the story you see. Then, we'll turn it into a clear viewer's checklist: how to spot manufactured narratives, verify sources fast, and protect your attention so you can think and vote on your own terms. If you care about the future more than the noise, don't skip. By the end, you'll see the playbook and you'll know how to read the field. Ready to separate signal from spin? Let's begin. The ballroom looks like any other. Hotel carpet, round tables clothed in white, a dais that has seen 1,000 keynotes. Outside, the vendor booths gleam with branded polos and slick pamphlets. Inside, the speakers cycle through an order of service that blends grievance, scripture, and marching orders. If you stay long enough to hear the hallway chatter and follow the email lists that collect your name at the door, the pattern becomes impossible to miss. A movement is at work that treats politics as a holy battle and democracy as an obstacle to overcome. Its power rests on three interlocking forces: money that oils the machinery and sets the agenda, lies that discipline followers and dissolve shared reality, and God invoked not as a source of humility but as a banner of dominion. Once you recognize that triangle, you start to see its geometry everywhere, from the green room to the prayer circle to the donor luncheon 2 doors down. The spine of that machine is financial. Concentrated fortunes, family offices, foundations, donor-advised funds, seed and sustain a web of advocacy hubs, litigation boutiques, training institutes, and media platforms that can appear separate while sharing staff, message discipline, and strategic timing. The money finds policy entrepreneurs who translate resentment into proposals, poll-test the language, and hand talking points to local operatives before most journalists know the story exists. The result is an assembly line. Funders underwrite infrastructure, infrastructure manufactures narratives, narratives mobilize foot soldiers, mobilization delivers pressure on courts, agencies, and elected officials precisely when decisions can be tilted. The storefronts change names, the campaigns change topics, but the choreography repeats. Around the money gathers an ecosystem of thinkers, sergeants, infantry, and power players, each with a role that clicks into the next. The thinkers, the ideologues at institutes and legal centers, mint terms and rationales that turn raw anger into pseudo-coherent doctrine. The sergeants, pastors, media personalities, county chairs, influence marketers, convert doctrine into action plans and scripts. The infantry, ordinary citizens, show up at hearings and primaries believing they are acting alone when, in fact, they are plugged into a supply chain of strategy and legal support. The power players, ambitious politicians and operatives, turn the agitation into policy, personnel, and force. It is not a conspiracy so much as a well-funded division of labor built to bend pluralistic rules toward illiberal ends. At the street level, it looks like parents reading from binders at school board meetings, citing excerpts that seem to have fallen into their laps that morning. The origin myth frames these uprisings as spontaneous. One mother finds an objectionable passage and 1,000 others awaken. Trace the communications and you find national templates, centralized training calls, legal coaching, and media pipelines that funnel outrage from local chambers to primetime segments. The people at the microphone are real, so are the hurts being leveraged, but a structure stands behind them, a scaffolding that standardizes grievances and turns them into candidate slates, recall campaigns, and donor pitches before most superintendents can schedule a response. To hold such a tent together, the movement makes generous use of religion. Not religion as a personal encounter with conscience and mystery, but religion as a civic operating system that assigns moral meaning to partisan goals. Sanctuaries double as precinct captains, with voter registration in the narthex, issue Bible studies in the fellowship hall, and Sunday shout-outs that leave no doubt which way the flock should move when they reach the booth. Pastors adopt the tone of wartime chaplains. Prayer teams are organized by county. Biblical citizenship courses teach that regaining control of the state is not merely permissible but commanded. In communities starving for belonging, this offers purpose and proximity. The movement harvests both to build a machine that prays on Wednesday and phones voters on Thursday. The coalition that gathers beneath this steeple is eclectic by design. Reactionary Catholic activists who dream of restored hierarchy sit a few tables away from libertarians who despise regulation. Silicon Valley utopians who want to re-engineer humanity nod alongside traditionalists who want to freeze sexual norms. Self-appointed apostles prophesy over donors who insist they are too rational for religion. Some are devout, some are atheist, some are simply opportunists. What binds them is not theology but a shared conviction that pluralistic democracy delivers outcomes they cannot abide, and that the cure is to shrink the zone in which ordinary citizens can influence power. That's why conflicts among factions are deferred until after ballots are counted. Victory first, coherence later. The intellectuals supplying language for this project present themselves as the adults in the room. Their essays lament decay, nihilism, and the administrative state, then propose a corrective that concentrates executive authority, weakens independent expertise, and replaces negotiation with command. They claim to rescue constitutionalism even as they urge a purge of civil servants, a rewiring of agencies to ensure obedience, and a judiciary stock to prefer hierarchy over equality. In their telling, normal democratic slowness becomes decadence. The cure for a complex society is a strong hand. The genius of the move is rhetorical. By calling disorder freedom gone too far, they make domination sound like restoration. The movement's emotional engine is a worldview that treats contemporary America as a fallen realm in need of rescue by the righteous. The label that surfaces again and again is reactionary nihilism, reactionary in its backward gaze toward an imagined golden age, nihilistic in its loss of faith that persuasion across difference can work. If politics is simply the application of force on behalf of the faithful, then guardrails against force are not sacrosanct. They are obstacles. Elections are honored when they deliver the right results. Courts are praised when they enforce the right doctrines. Science is celebrated when it sanctifies pre-existing beliefs. Everything else is captured by scare quotes, elections, law, experts, until trust in common institutions collapses. Disinformation is not a byproduct of this creed, it is one of its tools. Lies discipline the base and exhaust the middle. The technique is consistent. Label inconvenient facts as partisan, flood the zone with alternatives, and make verification so costly that many people retreat to team identity as their only compass. It is easier to fight a rival tribe than to argue with a dataset. When the scandal passes, the residue remains: cynicism about the press, suspicion of courts, disdain for public schools, contempt for health professionals. These are not collateral damages, they are the targets. Destroy the credibility of the institutions that hold pluralism together, and a monistic politics can claim necessity. Money supplies the accelerant. Philanthropic vehicles buy legitimacy for fringe claims by funding reports with footnotes and conferring them with the sheen of scholarship. Grants bankroll media platforms that amplify the talking points. Honoraria elevate spokespeople to punditry. Legal funds underwrite test cases tailor-made to split circuits and tempt the high court. Donor-advised anonymity makes it hard for citizens to see the hand behind the curtain, and intermediary nonprofits create plausible distance between the check writer and the outcome. The result is a feedback loop in which cash becomes opinion becomes law. Across the map, state houses serve as laboratories. Model bills written in one office streak across legislatures hundreds of miles away. The same phrases appear in dozens of hearings, sometimes word for word, as if a teleprompter hovered above the committee dais. Where agencies resist, personnel are threatened. Where schools resist, budgets are punished. Where local officials dissent, recall campaigns appear. When courts block a tactic, the campaign moves to the next lever: a ballot initiative here, a county ordinance there, a federal rider slipped into a midnight omnibus. The method is not to win one argument definitively, but to grind the opponent down with constant motion and selective force. The church, in this architecture, is a logistics center. Sunday liturgy sanctifies the week's targets. Midweek meetings train volunteers to canvass and litigate. Weekend conferences mix worship bands with strategy briefings. Spiritual language supplies moral cover for tactics that would otherwise be seen as coercive. If political opponents are demons, compromise is apostasy. If policy battles are cosmic war, violence at the edges looks like holy zeal rather than criminality. You don't have to persuade a demon, you have to cast it out. This framing narrows the repertoire of acceptable actions until only force seems faithful. The mask of spontaneity slips most completely in the education arena. Lists of obscene passages, pre-written public comments, pathways for rapid-fire public records requests, and candidate boot camps circulate through the same networks that distribute devotionals. In a month, a quiet district can be transformed into a battleground, librarians doxxed, teachers surveilled, administrators hounded out. The content shifts, from sex ed to race to public health protocols, but the aim remains constant: delegitimize public schools as common spaces and replace them with systems where a small set of gatekeepers can curate reality. When the dust clears, the victory is bigger than a pulled book. It is a weaker public. The coalition thrives on a paradox: preaching small government while demanding the state police the bedroom, championing freedom while seeking to criminalize dissent. Internal contradictions are papered over by a shared enemy and a shared mood. Yet the seams do show. Billionaires who want deregulation bristle when populists threaten their tax advantages. Traditionalists blanch at techno-utopians chasing post-human futures. Libertarians squirm when the pews demand surveillance of private life. These frictions matter because they hint at a truth the pageantry obscures. Without constant invention of new outrages and new demons, the coalition's factions remember they want different things. Meanwhile, the rank and file bring real pain into the room. Wages that buy less, commutes that steal hours, hospitals too far, fentanyl too near, a media torrent that never sleeps. The movement's gift is to redirect that pain away from structural causes and toward symbolic targets. A teacher's pronouns instead of a predatory lender, a library display instead of a hospital merger, a migrant family instead of a monopolist. The redirection soothes donors who benefit from the structures as it energizes congregants who long for control. Everyone gets something: tax policy for the top, meaning for the middle, enemies for the base. What democracy loses is the ability to deliberate honestly about the causes of shared suffering. If you step behind the curtain, the craft becomes visible in the details. Training decks replace vagueness with bulletproof phrasing. Parental rights polls better than censorship, so the phrase becomes a banner under which bands can march. Election integrity tests better than voter restriction, so ID laws and purges don new clothes. Medical freedom sells better than defy public health, so disinformation finds fresh air. Each term is a Trojan horse. The audience is invited to admire the shape while ignoring the cargo. The moment the horse clears the gate, the doors open and a different army steps out. The legal domain supplies another vantage point on the strategy. Recruit sympathetic plaintiffs, file in favorable circuits, and keep pushing doctrine until you find a composition of judges ready to accept it. A loss is content, a win is precedent. Friendly courts become accelerants, new rules to muzzle agencies, new readings that privilege religious actors over public interests, new doctrines that hobble the state's ability to correct market failures or protect the vulnerable. Each victory narrows the space where majorities can act, which is precisely the point. If you cannot win an argument with voters, win it in a forum where voters do not enter. In the background hums a media strategy tailored for the age of vibes. Short videos turn complex proposals into memes, live-streamed sermons splice scripture with scrolling super chats, influencers convert legislative arcana into a feeling, a low boil of indignation that can be poured onto whichever target the week requires. The line between worship set and stump speech dissolves. Scandals are never disqualifying when the underlying narrative is existential. If the choice is cast as survival versus annihilation, every compromise looks like appeasement, and every escalation looks like courage. Yet for all its confidence, the project reveals fear at its core. Fear of a country that is younger, more diverse, more plural than the one imagined from the stage. Fear that persuasion will fail, fear that institutions not captured will resist. That fear justifies shortcuts. It is why purges of civil servants are sold as reform, why voter access is treated as risk rather than a duty, why the press is maligned as an enemy, why teachers are cast as subversives. The more the movement leans on fear, the more dependent it becomes on continual crisis to keep its coalition aligned and its funders engaged. The phrase that captures the emotional physics of this age, reactionary nihilism, does more than label. It predicts tactics. A politics that despairs of common ground will prefer force to persuasion, vibes to verification, loyalty to law. It will demand enemies to give itself purpose. It will praise strongmen and scoff at procedures, and it will dress all of it in moral language so the faithful can do illiberal things while feeling holy. Once you see that logic, you can spot the next campaign before the banners are printed. What then counters an engine built from money, lies, and God? The answer begins with time horizon. Movements that aim to unmake democracy invest across decades. Those who would defend democracy need the same stamina. That means funding institutions that teach people how to participate and care for the facts, public schools strong enough to absorb controversy without collapse, independent courts with the expertise and legitimacy to rule without fear, civil services designed to attract talent and resist capture, local media capable of reporting beyond national outrage cycles. It means protecting the separation of church and state not to banish faith from public life, but to prevent any faction from weaponizing it against neighbors. It means dragging dark money into sunlight and treating fair rules as sacred even when they cost a win. It also means rebuilding a vocabulary of purpose that outlasts a news cycle. People join machines when machines offer meaning. The antidote is not a shinier spreadsheet, it is a better story. One in which pluralism is not a grim compromise but a civic art, in which disagreement need not bleed into dehumanization, in which the state does the boring work that lets ordinary people build beautiful lives. That story has to be embodied as much as told. Leaders who practice sacrifice downward, institutions that honor dignity up and down the chain, coalitions that make room for difference without collapsing into mush. The movement under the ballroom lights knows how to organize across factions. Defenders of democracy will need to learn the same craft without the crutch of demonology. There is practical work embedded in this ethic. Train candidates who can win outside the safest districts, invest in legal defense for librarians and poll workers so individual courage doesn't have to be heroic. Back watchdogs who trace money through the maze of intermediaries until citizens can see who funds what. Modernize election administration to be both accessible and secure so bad faith actors have fewer opportunities to sow doubt. Teach media literacy as civic hygiene, not as culture war. Build spaces, unions, clubs, congregations, civic leagues, where people practice self-government at a human scale and remember what it feels like to disagree without becoming enemies. None of this is glamorous. All of it is how a republic survives. The movement that gathers donors, prophets, influencers, and operatives into a single mood will not vanish. Its leaders will keep finding new theaters, libraries this month, courts next, then agencies, then corporations, then classrooms again. But its advantages erode when their opposition stops underestimating its organization, stops treating every flare-up as isolated, and builds counter-institutions with the same patience and professionalism. The paradox of the moment is that the best answer to a politicized religion is not an anti-religion, and the best answer to propaganda is not counter-propaganda. It is a citizenry that has places to gather, skills to practice, facts they can trust, and a sense that the future belongs to them together or not at all. Walk back through the hotel corridors at day's end. The tote bags are full of reading lists and QR codes. The hallway prayers have the cadence of marching songs. The ballroom will host a real estate seminar tomorrow and a wedding next week, but tonight it served as a command post for people who believe that only their faction deserves to rule. The lesson to carry out the door isn't despair, it's clarity. Money can buy megaphones and lawsuits, lies can corrode trust and turn neighbors into strangers. God, when conscripted into the service of power, can sanctify almost anything. But none of those forces is inevitable. They rely on inattention, fatigue, and the hope that most people will stay home. The counter is ordinary and stubborn. Show up for the unglamorous work, insist on institutions that outlast tempers, refuse to let fear write the story of who we are. The machine thrives on spectacle. A democracy survives on habits. The next chapter will be written not by the loudest room, but by the most persistent network of citizens determined to keep a common life alive.